The call that changed everything. The sun rose gently over the hills of Palo Alto, painting the sky with a soft orange light. Sundar Pichai sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at his phone. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional chirp of birds outside made the silence in the room feel heavier. His coffee had gone cold. He hadn't touched it. Sundar was known to the world as the calm, brilliant CEO of one of the largest companies on earth. To his employees, he was a man of vision and kindness. To his family, he was the son who had once shared a single room with 3 people in a modest home in Chennai, India. He never forgot where he came from, and yet today, he felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, unable to see what lay below. His phone vibrated suddenly. It was a message from an unknown number. The words were simple but sharp. You have to choose, company or family. You can't have both. He froze. The words didn't make sense. Not yet, but a strange chill ran down his spine as he read them. Again and again. Just then, his daughter Kavya came running down the stairs, her long hair swinging behind her. Papa, you promised to take me to my recital today. You didn't forget, right? He forced a smile, pushing the phone face down on the table. Of course not, beta. I wouldn't miss it for the world. But deep down, he already knew something was about to pull him away. At the office, the atmosphere was tense. Sundar's assistant met him at the elevator with a worried look. Sir, the board is waiting for you. They said it's urgent. Inside the boardroom, everyone was already seated. Some avoided his eyes. Others watched him closely. The chairman spoke first. We have a problem. A massive leak. Sensitive data. The media already knows. It could ruin everything. We need you to handle it. Immediately. Sundar felt a knot tighten his chest. He asked quietly, what kind of timeline are we talking about? The chairman leaned forward. Tonight. You need to address this before the press does. It's all on you now. The words echoed in his mind. Tonight. The same night as his daughter's recital. As he left the boardroom. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. You can't be in 2 places at once. Choose wisely. He felt his heart pounding now. Who was sending these messages? How do they know about his family? He tried to ignore it. But something inside him whispered that this was no coincidence. By the afternoon, the situation had worsened. Journalists were camped outside the building. Angry emails flooded his inbox. Employees whispered nervously in the hallways. Everyone expected Sundar to fix it. He sat alone in his office, staring out at the city skyline. His phone buzzed once. More. This time, it was a photo. His wife Anjali and Kavya walking outside their home, unaware of the camera. Below the photo, just one sentence. You have until midnight. He felt his hands trembling for the first time in years. Was this just about the company? Or was someone trying to hurt his family? He picked up the phone and dialed the number. It rang, but no one answered. At 6:30, his wife called. Sundar, we're already at the theater. Kavya keeps looking. At the door, waiting for you. Are you on your way? His throat went dry. I'll try, Anjali. I promise. But the truth was, he didn't know what he was going to do. The board was demanding a press statement within the hour. The unknown messages kept coming, more threatening now. And his family was waiting. He stood up, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Outside, the journalists were shouting questions through the glass doors. Inside, his assistant knocked timidly. Sir, everyone's waiting for your decision. What should I tell them? For a moment, Sundar closed his eyes and thought about his childhood in Chennai. He thought about his father working late into the night to afford his education. He thought about his mother saving her saris to buy him his first computer. He thought about how much they had all sacrificed for him to stand here today. Then here. Thought about Kavya's little face lighting up when she spotted him in the crowd. And he thought about the strange messages. How someone, somewhere, already knew what he cared about most. He opened his eyes. Tell them, I need a moment. He walked out of his office, ignoring the startled looks of his staff. He walked past the cameras, past the shouting journalists, and into the cool evening air. But as he reached the parking lot, his phone rang again. This time, it was a voice, low and cold. "You made your choice, Sundar. Now you'll pay the price." And then, line went dead. He stood frozen. The words echoing in his mind got behind him. The lights of the building glowed like a watchful eye. Ahead of him, the road to the theater stretched into the darkness. And somewhere in that darkness was someone who wanted to tear his world apart. With a deep breath, he got into his car and started the engine, but he didn't see the shadowy figure watching him from the far end of the parking lot, holding a phone and smiling faintly. And that was just the beginning. Asterisk. The shadow in the theater road stretched ahead like a river of light and darkness. Sundar's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned pale. Each street lamp that passed painted fleeting gold streaks across the windshield, but he barely noticed. His mind was a storm, questions crashing into each other. Like waves. Who was behind the messages? Why target his family? Why tonight? He turned the radio on, hoping for some noise to drown the thoughts. But even the soft music only made the silence inside him louder. He thought about the last words on the phone, that chilling voice saying, "You made your choice. Now you'll pay the price." He thought about how easily fear had slid into his veins. A man who managed thousands of people, billions of dollars, yet right now he felt helpless. Just a father and a husband trying to keep his family safe. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The screen glowed with a single word, "watching." His stomach tightened. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but the road behind was empty. He slowed slightly, half expecting a car to pull up behind him, but none did. And yet, he could not shake the feeling that he was not alone at Road Dot when he finally arrived at the theater. He parked farther away than usual. The lot was half empty, the glow of the marquee above throwing long shadows across the cracked pavement. He sat in the car for a moment, staring at the entrance. Families were still streaming inside, children holding flowers, parents holding programs, everyone smiling. It looked so ordinary. But his world no longer felt ordinary at all. He stepped out of the car and felt the chill of the evening air bite at his skin. He checked his phone again, almost afraid to see another message. This time, nothing. Just the black screen reflecting his own uneasy face. He slid it into his pocket and walked toward the theater. Inside, the warmth and light wrapped around him, the hum of soft chatter and faint music filling the air. The smell of fresh popcorn and perfume mingled in a way that reminded him of so many other nights like this. Nights when work had faded into the background and family had taken center stage. And he saw her. Kavya stood on the small stage, her dark eyes scanning the crowd, her little hands clutching her violin. She was dressed in a simple blue dress, her hair tied neatly, and yet she looked radiant. When she spotted him at the door, her face lit up, and she waved with such innocent joy it almost broke him inside. Anjali, sitting in the third row, turned and smiled at him, though her eyes carried a quiet question. "Are you really here?" He nodded faintly, forcing a reassuring smile. Though his chest still felt heavy. He took a seat beside Anjali, whispering a soft apology. She squeezed his hand gently, as if to say nothing more needed to be said. And for a few precious minutes, as the first notes of music floated through the air and the children began their recital, he allowed himself to believe that everything would be okay. But then he felt it, a presence, from the corner of his eye. He noticed a man standing at the back of the theater, leaning against the wall. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, his face partly hidden by the shadows. But it wasn't his appearance that made Sundar's stomach churn. It was the way. The man was staring at him, unblinking, patient. Sundar tried to focus on the stage, but he couldn't. His eyes kept drifting back to that figure, standing motionless, as if carved from the darkness itself. And then, almost imperceptibly, the man raised a phone to his ear, never breaking eye contact. Sundar's own phone vibrated at that exact moment. He picked it up, feeling a faint tremor in his fingers. "You came here instead of fixing your mess," the same cold voice said. "You disappoint me, Sundar. Who are you?" Sundar whispered, glancing. at Anjali, who was clapping for the children. "What do you want from me?" "I already told you," the voice replied. "You can't have both. Tonight you lose one. The choice is still yours." "Leave my family out of this," Sundar said sharply, his voice cracking. "This is between you and me." The man at the back tilted his head slightly, as though he could hear every word. "Too late," the voice murmured. "Check your pocket." Sundar froze. Slowly, almost afraid of what he would find, he slipped his hand into the inside pocket of his jacket. His fingers closed around a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. He unfolded it with trembling hands. Inside was a single line written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Midnight. If you're not at the office by then, she pays the price." His blood ran cold. He turned his gaze back to the stage. Kavya was finishing her piece, bowing gracefully to the applause. She looked so proud, so happy. Anjali wiped a tear from her cheek, smiling at their daughter. And yet, all Sundar could feel was the weight of the clock ticking inside his mind. He stood abruptly, mumbling something about needing air. Anjali looked at him, worried, but didn't stop him. He slipped out of the theater, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway outside. The man in the dark coat was waiting near the edge of the parking lot. Sundar's breath caught as he stepped closer. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice low but fierce. The man smiled faintly, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had already won. "You already know," he replied. "Why my family?" Sundar asked, his fists clenching. "This is about the company, isn't it?" "Then take it out on me, not them." The man tilted his head again, as if amused. "You made your choice when you walked in here," he said. "And now you will see what that choice costs." Before Sundar could say another word, the man turned and disappeared into the shadows between the cars. Sundar stood there, his heart pounding, the paper still clutched in his hand. Midnight, less than 3 hours left. He looked back toward the theater, where he could still hear the muffled applause and music. His family was right there, so close, yet already in danger. And behind him, the distant lights of his office glowed on the horizon. Like an accusation he couldn't escape, he pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant. "Tell the board." "I'll handle it before midnight," he said, his voice hollow. "But, sir, the press is already—" "Just tell them," Sundar interrupted, cutting the call. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the sky. The stars above seemed cold and distant, watching him silently, and then he got into his car again, gripping the wheel even tighter this time. But as he started to drive away, he noticed something chilling in the rearview mirror, Kavya's violin case, sitting on the back seat, but he hadn't brought it with him. And next to it, a single black envelope, unmarked, waiting for him to open it. Asterisk, the envelope of silent Sessender sat in the driver's seat, staring at the black envelope lying on the back seat beside the violin case. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his fingers gripping the edge of the steering wheel so hard his knuckles felt numb. Outside, the night had deepened, the last traces of orange sunset swallowed by a thick velvet darkness. Somewhere beyond the glass of his window, he could still hear faint laughter and applause from inside the theater. It felt strange, almost cruel, how the world continued so normally while his own life had fallen into a quiet chaos. He reached back slowly, as though touching the envelope might burn him. Its surface was smooth, cold, and oddly heavy in his hand. He stared at it for a long time, his mind whispering all kinds of fears. Was it a threat? A clue? A warning? Or all of them at once? He slipped his finger under the flap and carefully pulled it open. Inside was a single photograph and a folded note. The photo stopped his breath. It showed Kavya sitting on a park bench earlier that afternoon, eating an ice cream. Beside her was a man, the same man in the dark coat from the theater, standing just behind her, his shadow falling over her small figure. Sundar felt his stomach twist violently. He hadn't even noticed anyone near her that day. He hadn't noticed because he hadn't been there at all. With trembling hands, he unfolded the note. The handwriting was sharp and deliberate, just like the last message. "You think this is only about you. It isn't. She's already part of it now. Go to the rooftop of your office before midnight. Come alone. No police. If you fail, you'll never see her again. His eyes stayed fixed on the words, reading them over and over until the letters blurred. His throat felt tight, his chest heavy. He looked back at the theater entrance. Through the glass doors, he could see Anjali chatting with another parent, her face calm, unsuspecting. Kavya was standing on the stage with her friends, her small hands still clutching the violin, her smile bright under the soft lights, and yet someone had already been near her. Someone had already touched the fragile circle of safety around his. Family Dot, he started the engine. The quiet hum of the car seemed louder than ever in the stillness of the night. The headlights sliced through the darkness as he pulled out of the parking lot. The envelope still resting on the passenger seat beside him like an unwelcome passenger Dot as he drove. The city lights stretched around him, glittering and cold. The streets were nearly empty now, and every shadow between the buildings felt alive, watching him, waiting. He checked the rearview mirror again and again, half expecting to see the man's dark silhouette following him. But each time, there was nothing. Only the empty road curling behind him like a question he couldn't answer. He thought about calling Anjali, telling her to leave the theater, to take Kavya and run somewhere safe. But safe where? Who could they trust? And if he called, would that break the rules and put them in even more danger? The rooftop of his office. Alone. Before midnight. The words burned in his mind like fire when he finally reached the familiar glass tower that housed his office. It looked different somehow. Colder. More imposing. As though the building itself was aware of what waited for him inside. The parking garage was nearly empty. The sound of his shoes against the concrete echoing eerily as he walked toward the elevator Dot. He stepped inside and pressed the button for the top floor. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime. And for a few seconds he stood there, staring at his reflection in the mirrored walls. His face looked older, more tired than it had that morning. His tie was crooked. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. When the doors slid open, the hallway was empty, lit only by a line of faint fluorescent lights humming above. His office door stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open, slowly on his desk. Another envelope was waiting. Black. Unmarked. His heart hammered as he opened it. This time, no photo. Just a key card with a note. Rooftop. East door. Use this 5 minutes. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 5 minutes to midnight. He slipped the card into his pocket and walked down the silent hallway toward the stairwell. Each step echoed like a warning. The stairwell itself was cold and smelled faintly of dust and steel. He climbed quickly, 2 steps at a time, until he reached the metal door marked roof access. He slid the card through the reader and heard a soft click as the lock released. The rooftop was dark and windy. The city stretched below him, a sea of lights and noise that felt very far away. And then he saw him. The man in the dark coat stood at the edge of the rooftop, his back to Sundar, staring out at the skyline. Beside him was a chair, and on that chair, a small black backpack. The man spoke without turning. You made it. I wasn't sure you would. Where is she? Sundar demanded, his voice cracking. The man chuckled softly, still not turning around. Always straight to the point. That's good. But tonight isn't about answers. It's about choices. I chose to come here, Sundar said, taking a step closer. Now let her go. The man finally turned, and in the faint light Sundar could see his face more clearly. Sharp features, calm eyes, and a faint scar running down his left cheek. He was holding a phone in one hand and a small remote in the other. You still don't understand, the man said evenly. You think coming here was enough? But you still have to choose what you're willing to give up. He gestured toward the backpack. Inside are documents that will destroy your company. Proof of everything you've tried to keep hidden. Scandals. Secrets. Things the world is dying to know. He held up the remote. And here's what controls the explosives under the bench in the park where your daughter is sitting right now. Yes, she's there, waiting. Sundar felt the ground sway beneath him, as though the rooftop itself had tilted. You're lying? He whispered, though the words felt hollow even as he said them. The man shook his head almost kindly. No, you just don't want it to be true. Sundar took another step closer, his voice low but fierce now. What do you want from me? The man's calm smile never wavered. You already know. You can save your company. Or you can save your family. Open the backpack and throw those papers over the edge, and your daughter walks away unharmed. Keep the papers and your company survives, but she doesn't. He placed the remote on the chair beside the backpack and stepped back, folding his arms. You have 1 minute, no tricks, no calls. Just choose. Sundar stared at the backpack, then at the remote, his breath coming fast and uneven. The weight of everything pressed down on him at once. The company he had built with so many years of work and sacrifice. The thousands of employees who depended on him. The respect of the world. And the little girl sitting in a park somewhere. Unaware of how close she was to danger, the man checked his watch. 45 seconds, he said quietly. Sundar's hands hovered over the backpack. His thoughts screamed at him, clashing against each other so violently he could hardly hear anything. But the sound of his own heart. 30 seconds. He thought of his mother back in Chennai, her voice gentle in his memory. Always choose what lets you sleep at night. Beta. 20 seconds. He thought of Anjali's hand on his, her quiet faith in him even when he didn't deserve it. 10 seconds. He closed his eyes and reached for the backpack, and then froze, because from somewhere behind him, in the shadows of the stairwell door, he heard another voice. Soft, trembling, unmistakable. Papa? He spun around, his breath catching in his throat. Standing there, her hair tangled, her little face pale and frightened, was Kavya, and she was not alone. Behind her, holding her by the shoulders, was another figure. Someone he hadn't seen before. Someone with eyes colder than the first man's, already raising something shiny and metallic in the air. The man on the rooftop smiled faintly and murmured, "Time's up." Asterisk, the second choice sundar could not move. His feet felt as though they were nailed to the rooftop floor, his breath shallow and sharp in his chest. The cool night wind whipped around him, but he felt nothing except the weight of his daughter's terrified eyes. Kavya stood in the doorway to the rooftop stairwell, her little hands clenched into fists, her shoulders trembling. And behind her was a man Sundar had never seen before, taller, broader than the one in the dark coat, with a cruel calmness in his expression and a faint smirk on his lips. The new man held a short steel rod in one hand. The kind Sundar, recognized from airport security videos, a collapsible baton, and in the other hand he had something even worse. A tiny black device with a single blinking red light. The first man, still standing near the chair with the backpack and the remote, raised an eyebrow, as though mildly amused by the intrusion. He spoke in that same flat, controlled tone. You weren't supposed to bring her up here yet. The second man chuckled softly, his fingers tightening slightly on Kavya's shoulder. And you weren't supposed to hesitate, he replied. His voice was rougher, sharper, like sandpaper. Sundar's eyes darted between them. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His mind was trying to catch up, trying to understand what had just happened, how Kavya had gotten here, why the second man had appeared, what this new device in his hand meant. The second man stepped forward, pushing Kavya slightly ahead of him. She stumbled and nearly fell, but caught herself and looked up at Sundar, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Papa, I'm scared." Those 3 words cut through him deeper than anything else could have. Sundar took an instinctive step toward her, but the second man held up the device with the blinking light and shook his head slowly. Not another step, he warned, his smirk fading into something colder. Unless you want to see what happens when this button is pressed. The first man sighed and ran a hand through his hair, as though mildly annoyed at the turn of events. This was not part of the plan, he muttered. Then he glanced at Sundar with something almost like sympathy. But I suppose you have no choice now. You still have to choose, but the stakes have doubled. The second man laughed under his breath. More than doubled. What do you want? Sundar finally managed to choke out, his voice hoarse. The first man gestured calmly at the chair, at the backpack and the remote. Same choice, Sundar, he said softly. But now there are three outcomes. Pick up the backpack, destroy the documents, and we let both her and your company go. Pick up the remote, save only her, and the company burns to the ground. Do nothing, and you lose both. The second man leaned closer to Kavya, his smirk returning. And if you choose wrong, maybe even more than both? The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Sundar's hands were trembling now, his eyes darting between the chair and his daughter and the two men. He could feel the pressure of the decision crushing him from all sides. How? Do I know you'll keep your word? He demanded. The first man tilted his head, almost amused. You don't, he replied simply. Kavya took a small, hesitant step toward him. Tears had begun streaming down her cheeks, but she still held his gaze. Papa, she whispered, don't let them hurt you. That broke him. He thought of all the nights he had stayed late at the office, telling himself it was for his family's future. He thought of all the birthdays he had missed, the stories he hadn't heard, the moments he hadn't witnessed because he was always chasing some distant goal. And now all of it, every bit of it, balanced on the edge of this moment. The second man pressed the device closer to Kavya's arm, the red light blinking faster now. Tick-tock, he sneered. Sundar closed his eyes for just a second and took a deep breath. He thought of his mother's words again, from so long ago. Always choose what lets you sleep at night. Beta, when he opened his eyes, something inside him had shifted. He stepped forward toward the chair, ignoring the second man's bark of warning. His hand hovered over the backpack, then over the remote, then back again. The first man watched him silently, his expression unreadable, and then Sundar did something neither of them expected. He grabbed the backpack with his left hand and the remote with his right, holding both aloft. His chest heaved as he spoke, his voice stronger now than it had been all night. You said I have to choose. Fine, I choose both. For a long second, there was silence. The wind howled between the skyscrapers. The city lights flickered below. Then. The second man's smirk faltered. You can't, he spat. That's not how this works. But Sundar tightened his grip on both objects, his eyes blazing. Then you'll have to decide what happens now, he said through clenched teeth. The second man raised his baton, stepping closer to Kavya. But before he could touch her, the first man suddenly moved fast and smooth like a shadow and grabbed the second man's wrist, twisting it hard. The device clattered to the rooftop. The second man cursed and tried to break free. But the first man kicked his legs out from under him and sent him crashing to the ground. Sundar froze, staring in disbelief as the two men struggled. The first man finally pinned the second one to the floor and looked up at Sundar, his chest rising and falling with effort. Run, he ordered. Now, Sundar didn't wait. He dropped the backpack and remote into his pockets, scooped up Kavya into his arms, and sprinted toward the stairwell door. She clung to his neck, burying her face in his shoulder, her sobs muffled against his shirt as he reached the door. He risked one last glance over his shoulder. The first man was still holding the second down, but he caught Sundar's eye and nodded, not with malice this time, but with something strange, something almost like respect. Then Sundar was down the stairs, his footsteps echoing wildly. He ran until his legs ached, until his lungs burned, until he burst out into the night air at street level. He didn't stop running. He carried Kavya all the way to the car, threw open the door, and gently set her in the back seat. She clung to his hand even then, her small fingers gripping his like they'd never let go. They drove in silence for several minutes, the city rushing past in a blur of light and shadow. Sundar's mind was still spinning, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. Finally, Kavya spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Papa, who were those men? He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his throat tightening. Someone who wanted me to forget what really matters, he said softly. She frowned. confused, but didn't press further. Instead, she leaned her head against the window, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion, but Sundar's hands still shook on the wheel. Because he knew it wasn't over Dot in his pocket, he still felt the weight of the backpack and the remote. Two choices. He hadn't truly resolved Dot, and as he stopped at a red light, his phone buzzed once more. He picked it up with a trembling hand and read. The message on the screen, "This is only the beginning." The light turned green. He pressed the accelerator, his jaw set, his mind already bracing for whatever came next, because he had made his choice. But the game was far from over. Asterisk, the man behind the curtained car moved through the empty streets. Like a ghost, its headlights sweeping across shuttered shops and sleeping houses. Sundar drove in silence, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road but his mind far away. In the back seat, Kavya had finally fallen asleep, her head resting against the door, her small chest rising and falling in the rhythm of dreams. She looked peaceful now, but Sundar knew that peace was fragile. He kept hearing the words over and over in his mind. This is only the beginning. Whoever was sending these messages was still out there, still watching, still pulling the strings, and he still didn't know why. When he reached home, the house was dark and quiet. He carried Kavya inside carefully, not wanting to wake her. Anjali met him at the door, her eyes wide with worry, her hands instinctively reaching for their daughter. She didn't ask questions yet. She simply held Kavya close, as if to convince herself that she was really here, really safe. Sundar closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment as though all the strength had drained out of him. Anjali looked at him, then her expression soft but searching. What happened tonight? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated. He wanted to tell her everything. The rooftop, the men, the choice he'd been forced to make. But the words tangled in his throat. If he spoke them out loud, it would make them real. And he wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, he simply said, "They won't stop." Anjali's eyes darkened, but she nodded slowly, as though she already understood more than he realized. She took Kavya upstairs, and Sundar stayed behind, sinking into the couch, staring into the darkness. The backpack and the remote still sat on the coffee table in front of him. Two impossible choices. Still waiting, he reached for the backpack and opened it slowly, his fingers brushing over the papers inside. It was worse than he had imagined. Documents exposing secret deals, hidden accounts, confidential emails that could destroy his company's reputation forever. Everything here, if released, would undo years of work. But then he thought of the man's calm, cruel smile on the rooftop. "This is about more than you," he had said. Sundar closed the backpack again and leaned back, pressing his palms over his eyes. He felt the exhaustion crawling through his bones, but he knew he couldn't sleep. Not yet. When his phone buzzed again, he almost didn't want to look. But he forced himself to pick it up. "You should meet me," the message read. "Come." Alone. Dawn. The old railway bridge. Below the text was an image of Kavya sleeping in her bed, taken just moments ago. Sundar's blood went cold. The hours until dawn passed slowly. He sat in the darkness, listening to the faint sounds of Anjali moving upstairs, of the house breathing around him. Every creak of the wood, every whisper of the wind outside made his chest tighten. Finally, when the first pale light of morning began to seep through the curtains, he stood up, grabbed his coat, and slipped out of the house. He drove through the quiet streets, the city still wrapped in a strange, heavy silence. The old railway bridge was deserted. Rust flaked from its beams, and weeds pushed up through the cracks in the pavement. Sundar parked at the edge and stepped out, the air damp and cold against his skin. A figure stood in the center of the bridge, waiting. Not the man in the dark coat. Not the second man from the rooftop. This was someone else, older, wearing a simple jacket, his hands in his pockets. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp. Watching Sundar approach when Sundar stopped a few steps away, the man spoke first. "You've done well," he said, his voice low and calm. "Most people break by now. What do you want from me?" Sundar demanded, Though his voice cracked slightly on the last word, the man tilted his head, as if studying him. Not much more than what you've already given, he replied. A little time, a little obedience, and then we all walk away. Sundar felt his fists clench at his sides. Why my family? Why drag them into this? The man's mouth curled into something. That might have been a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Because nothing sharpens a man's choices like fear, he said. We needed to know what kind of man you are. What you'll protect at any cost. So this is a test? Sundar asked bitterly. Just a game to you? The man's smile faded. No, he said softly. Not a game, a lesson. You've built something powerful, Sundar. Something that changes lives. But you forgot something along the way. Respect. Humility. The kind of kindness that comes when you remember where you came from. People who rise too high forget how to look down. We wanted to see if you still could. Sundar stared at him, stunned that the man nodded toward the backpack still clutched in Sundar's hand. You still have the choice. Burn your company to save yourself, or save your company and watch it hollow you out from inside. Or find the third path, the harder one. Sundar swallowed hard. What third path? The man's eyes glinted faintly. In the morning light. Figure it out, he said simply. Then he turned and walked away. Disappearing into the fog at the end of the bridge, Sundar stood there for a long moment, the words echoing in his head, the harder one. On his way back to the car, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, not a message. He answered with a shaky breath. Papa. His heart stopped. It was Kavya. Papa, there's a man in the house, she whispered, her voice trembling. He says you still haven't decided. Sundar's blood ran. Cold. Where's Mama? He asked quickly. She's in her room, Kavya whispered. But she can't come out. The man locked the door. Sundar's hand tightened around the phone until it hurt. Listen to me, Beta, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Stay where you are. Don't move. I'm coming home right now. He hung up and ran to the car, his mind spinning wildly. They were still in the house, still holding his family hostage, still forcing him to choose Dot. But now, as he gripped the wheel and sped through the waking city, something inside him began to harden. Realize then what the man on the bridge had meant. The third path wasn't between the company and his family. It was against the people who made him choose it all. He drove faster, his jaw set, his hand steady now. When he reached his street, he could already see the front door of the house slightly ajar, the faintest flicker of movement inside. He parked a few houses away and slipped out quietly, the backpack still slung over his shoulder. As he approached the house, he thought of his mother, his father, the long nights of study under dim lights back in Chennai. He thought of the first time he held Kavya in his arms, of Anjali's quiet smile on their wedding day. He thought of the company he had built, but more than that, of the people behind it, the ones who trusted him to lead with integrity. And he thought of how he could not let fear make his choices for him anymore. He stepped into the house, silent as a shadow, and as he closed the door behind him, he saw the figure standing in the living room, waiting for him. This time it was neither the man in the dark coat, nor the one from the rooftop, nor the one from the bridge. It was someone he knew, someone he had trusted for years. And in that moment, as their eyes met, Sundar finally understood who had been behind everything all along. Asterisk, the last decision, the living room was quiet. Almost too quiet, as Sundar stood frozen in the doorway. The man in front of him, the one he thought he had known for years, sat casually on the couch, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his head tilted slightly as though amused. Behind him, near the hallway, Kavya peeked out from behind a chair, her eyes wide and fearful, her little hands clutching the fabric of her dress. Anjali was nowhere to be seen, but he could hear faint muffled sounds upstairs, like a door rattling. Softly, someone trying to get out. The man on the couch finally spoke, his voice calm and even, carrying the same confidence Sundar remembered from countless meetings, countless conversations where they'd sat side by side building a company. together. You took longer than I expected, he said. Sundar felt his stomach turn as he took another step inside, his eyes never leaving the man's face. Why? He asked simply, though the question carried everything inside him. All the anger, the confusion, the betrayal. The man leaned back slightly, one corner of his mouth lifting into a faint smile. Because you forgot, he replied. You forgot the people who helped you climb. You forgot what it means to fight for more than just numbers and headlines. And you forgot about me. Sundar's fist tightened at his sides. You could have just walked away, he said bitterly. You didn't have to drag my family into this. The man's smile vanished then, replaced by something colder, sharper. But if I'd walked away, he said, you wouldn't have learned anything. You would have kept living in that glass tower of yours, thinking you were untouchable. I had to remind you what fear feels like, what it's like to choose, really choose, between what matters and what doesn't. Sundar glanced toward Kavya. Her wide, tearful eyes locked on his. So, what now? Sundar asked quietly, what is it you want from me? The man stood then, slowly, deliberately, and walked toward him until they were only a few feet apart. He stopped, his gaze steady and hard. You still have the backpack, he said. You still have the remote. You still have the choice. Destroy the company to save yourself. Save the company and lose your family. Or walk away from all of it and start over. That's the third path. No power, no title. No wealth, just your family and your name. That's the choice I made once, and you laughed at me for it. The words hit Sundar like stones. Memories flashed through his mind. The day this man had resigned, years ago, after an argument about the company's direction. Sundar had dismissed him then, too focused on his vision to see the pain behind his colleague's words. He closed his eyes for a moment and thought of his father in Chennai. How he used to come home late, but still sat with him every night to talk about his day. He thought of his mother, who gave up everything so he could have an education. He thought of Anjali, who had stood by him through every failure, every victory. And he thought of Kavya, who only wanted her papa to be there when she looked into the audience and smiled. He opened his eyes and spoke. His voice steady now. You were right, he said simply. I did forget. But I'm not forgetting anymore.